I'm the first one to say that when I lost all of that weight, about 83 pounds, I did feel better. I saw things improving. If it's something that you can tolerate and like, then you're more likely to continue on and want to do it. So if you get yourself into something that's just very extreme, chances are it's not going to work long term for you. Welcome back. In today's third episode of our health series, we're going to be talking about the true cost of being overweight. And I feel like I have a lot of credibility on this subject matter, considering I was once 300 pounds. And believe me, it cost me a lot. So, did you know that 40% of adults over the age of 20 are considered obese? And the definition of being obese is having a BMI or body mass index score of 30 or above. So let's even break that down even a little bit further. For those that are 20 to 39, approximately 35.5% of those in that age category are considered obese. For those that are 40 to 59, that's 46.4% of those adults are considered obese. And for those over 60, they're at 38.9% of the adults in that category are considered obese. So these are staggering numbers. I mean, we're not quite to half, but in that 40 to 59 at 46.5%, I mean, we're almost there. I mean, that's almost 1 out of 2 people are considered obese in this country. Obesity is directly related to so many diseases, which we'll get into later on in the episode. So make sure that you continue to listen. But if you think about it, it's just absolutely crazy to think of what the correlation of obesity is compared to how it costs so much money in healthcare, along with intangibles that we can also get into later. So let's get into it. So obesity and healthcare costs. So one of the things that, especially being in the employee benefits business, one of the things that I get to see is that, a lot of people are heavily dependent on prescription medications, right? So, I mean, that's a part of what is involved in their daily life. And a lot of these diseases that have a direct correlation to being obese, right, have a lot of prescriptions, right, that people take, to be able to manage these diseases and ultimately, have to continue navigating through, their daily life, with some sort of prescription med to basically, address that specific issue. This is a staggering statistic. So this is crazy. So over 50% as of 2025. So let me get that again. Over 50% of the premium spend. So what your healthcare costs, right? 50% of what that healthcare insurance premium costs is being spent on pharmaceuticals, on prescription drugs. So, I mean, that's a clear indication, right, that there is a heavy utilization as far as cost as it relates to these particular diseases and the prescriptions that people have to take to basically manage these diseases. The other issues, I mean, think about all of the doctor's visits, all of the blood tests, all of the tests that any one of these doctors, can order, right, to be able to get some more information on what this is actually doing to people's health. I mean, think about just people being in the hospital because they have particular issues, right? Or they come down with something, or one of these diseases actually puts them there. And ultimately, think about the long-term impact of that care over a period of years, right? So, I mean, that's very important. People have insurance and they end up having to use the insurance, because they have a disease or they're sick. But the crazy thing about it is if we go back, to how obesity has direct links and correlations to a lot of these diseases that ultimately have an expense, right, that, people have to utilize healthcare for. So the end result is as more people are using the insurance, to address these diseases, then ultimately our premiums are going to continue to go up. So let's talk about some of the intangibles that we might not be able to measure directly on, dollars and cents, but let's just talk about, the lost productivity, and, the amount of sick days that people have to take, or, if they're not at 100%, are they able to work, fully and be the most productive, versions of themselves while they're working in whatever they're doing, whether they work for somebody else or they have their own business. It doesn't really matter. But if they're not at 100%, then they're not going to be able to operate in that manner. So, there is a lot of cost that is impactful to just overall productivity, which, basically, relates to our economy. I think the biggest one for me that I can personally relate to is the emotional toll that it takes on people who support those that are not feeling their best, right? Or those that have one of these diseases. So last episode, we talked about my dad who has atypical Alzheimer's and all of the things that, not only that, but all the other issues that he had because he was obese before he lost 100 pounds, and just having to manage all of that as well as, the Alzheimer's portion of it. I mean, it takes a toll on your family. It takes a toll on, a spouse. It takes a toll on your kids. It takes a toll on, whomever it is that is just involved in having to help support this. So, I mean, there's a huge cost, when it comes to that. And I think that a lot of times, we oftentimes kind of forget, and just even personally, when I was 300 pounds and I was, constantly being stressed out, it was a real problematic toll for my spouse and my kids, just having to, see their dad in that particular condition, and also just, being able to address it and just go and navigate that roller coaster ride, until, that time where I was like, enough is enough. What can I do about this? And that's something else that we're going to be talking about, later in the episode. And it's really about the small things, but we can kind of get into that a little bit later. Let's talk a little bit about some of these diseases. I'm not going to name them all because there's quite a few, but one of the biggest ones is cardiovascular disease. So, heart disease, hypertension, high cholesterol, right? Risk of stroke. I mean, these are all things that are caused by being overweight. I mean, if you just type in obesity and, what is it linked to? I mean, cardiovascular disease, is one of the top ones that comes up because, I mean, that has to do with your heart, right? So, if your heart isn't in good shape, and that's pretty much one of the main muscles, right, that pumps all the blood, right, throughout all of the rest of your body. And if that's not working, at peak performance, then that has its whole plethora of other things that, that are problematic and just cause other issues and ultimately cause you to be sick. So the other thing is plaque buildup, right? So plaque buildup, is another big issue that's caused by obesity, and it's relatable to cardiovascular disease. And ultimately, guess what? If your veins are plugged up and the blood can't get through, right? It's not going to be able to serve you well, and it causes all these other issues. And we can go on and on and on about how important your cardiovascular health is to your longevity and your overall quality of life. The other thing that obesity has a direct correlation to is type 2 diabetes, right? Which causes insulin resistance. You're 3 times more likely to get type 2 diabetes if you're obese. So that is something that you do have control over, right? Those that have type 1, I mean, that's hereditary, or can be caused in other ways that people don't have control over. But type 2 diabetes is something that you can control, but a lot of it is because you become obese. I'm not saying that every single type 2 diabetic had a direct correlation to obesity, but they're saying that you're 3 times more likely to get type 2 diabetes, which is insulin resistance that causes a whole other plethora of issues, is caused because people are overweight and they're obese. And sleep apnea, I mean, don't get me started on that because when I was 300 pounds, I think I was pretty convinced that I had sleep apnea, even though I never like officially got diagnosed. But I mean, more or less, you know, to break it down simply, you're not getting oxygen to your brain when you're sleeping. So I don't know. That's not a good thing. If you're not getting a good amount of oxygen to your brain while you're sleeping, when you're supposed to be, healing up from the day, right? Because that's when your body, reboots and resets, on so many different levels. But if you're not getting the needed oxygen because you're so heavy and you're so overweight that you can't consume enough oxygen to your brain, ultimately that's not going to be a good thing. I mean, I don't have to go deep into that, but I mean, think about it. Sleep is so important. Every time I listen to people, like the majority of people have to sleep. If you don't sleep, you're not functioning at your best, you're more stressed, right? Some people have, mental health issues because of lack of sleep, right? And those are all very important things to address, but those are just relatable diseases because you're not getting sleep or good sleep and oxygen to your brain. And ultimately, it's just causing a whole bunch of other health issues. So let's talk about the joints, right? So when you're heavier, you're harder on your knees, you're harder on your hips, you're harder on your ankles. I mean, there's so many different areas of your body, that get a higher level of wear and tear, when you're obese and you're overweight. And that's going to ultimately lead to chronic pain, knee replacements, right? Maybe a hip replacement. But these are all, I don't know, these are all things that people shouldn't aspire to look forward to. I mean, I think, if I'm thinking about it long term, I mean, I'd like to keep, the original knees that I was born with. And I know that doesn't always work and people do get injured, but if you're wearing down your knees and you're wearing down your joints, because you're overweight, it's definitely not going to be a good thing. And I touched on it a little bit, but mental health. So there is a huge correlation to being obese, and it's being linked to depression, anxiety. Of course, when you're overweight, maybe you don't feel really good about yourself. So there's self-esteem issues. And, all of those things can just spiral, into ultimately just bringing on a lot of psychological stress and which is going to cause other issues. So it's crazy to think about how much being overweight, can just lead to all these other health issues, which ultimately, right, lead to more healthcare and a higher cost of healthcare and ultimately a lower quality of life. I mean, who wants to be in constant turmoil, right, when you're dealing with these diseases? Because, you know, if obesity has a direct correlation, and I'm the first one to say that when I lost all of that weight, about 83 pounds, I did feel better. I saw things improving. My blood pressure was better. My cholesterol was better. I mean, I slept better, right? My overall health was just better. I've seen it in my dad, right? As I mentioned in the last episode, I mean, he got a 5-point cognitive score bump. That wasn't the only reason, but it was a major reason. When he lost that 100 pounds, I mean, I'm just telling you, it was life changing for him. When we really talk about like what can we do about this, this issue of being obese. And remember, I mean, a lot of people aren't alone. I mean, think about it. I mean, think about the statistics, right? 40%. So 4 out of 10 people over the age of 20 are considered obese because they have a BMI score of 30 or above. So that's 4 out of 10 people. So that is causing a huge strain, right? All the way around, as far as just not only healthcare costs, but just the number of people having good quality of life, because they are suffering, from something that's caused by obesity. So what can we do about it? So one of the things that I say is that, it's not about just one thing. that is going to just change everything. I know that would sound great if you could just take one pill or eat one superfood or do one thing and all of a sudden all of your problems would go away. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, that's something that, would be really easy, especially since a lot of us don't have a lot of time. That's just kind of a lot of people these days, right? Everybody, is working. We live in a fast paced life. It's just the way that our culture is, and there's not a lot of downtime. So let's just talk about a few things that you can do. So start small. And if you really think about it, if you have a lot of little things, right, it adds up to a big thing. And that was one of the things for me in my personal journey, losing that 83 pounds. Yes, a lot of it, I mean, almost all of it was diet. I didn't really do a whole ton of exercising during that time, but it was about being disciplined, but it was about the little wins, right? So you want to start small. So whether it's like, if you can't commit to a specific diet, because this is another thing that I think people need to understand is that keto worked for me, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for the next person. It works for a good amount of people. Some people like the paleo diet. Some people, count their calories. I mean, these are all things that I would say that, you have to do your own research into, which is going to fit not only into, what you like to do, right? Because if it's something that you can tolerate and like, then you're more likely to continue on and want to do it. So if you get yourself into something that's just very extreme, chances are it's not going to work long term for you. And that's why I always encourage people to kind of start small. But, one of the simplest things that you can do, right? I mean, eat whole foods, right? Don't eat processed food. Don't get the foods that are, already, pre-made. Look at the back of the box. If you have a ton of ingredients in there and there's a ton of ingredients that you can't pronounce, that's pretty easy to consider that that is a processed food. So whole foods, vegetable, meat, I mean, so on and so forth. You can do your own research on what you think, would work best, for you, what works best for your budget, but portion control. You don't have to have large quantities of food, right, to be satisfied. And believe me, even though if you were to even just start by cutting all of your portion sizes, so like whatever you normally eat on a plate, just eat half and save half. Just start there. If you were to just do that, you're gonna cut your consumption down if you really think about it by half, right? Portion control is a huge deal. And it's something that will allow you to at least start. And then next thing you know, your body will adjust, your stomach will adjust, and you're not going to be as hungry, and wanting to eat all of that food all at once. The other thing that I can't stress enough, and I know this sounds crazy because it sounded crazy to me, but I drank a gallon of water every day. So water is super important. So I'm not saying that you have to drink a gallon of water, but drinking water at some level, right? And again, to your own research, for what works for you is a pivotal part of all of this. So, I mean, it sounds like something so simple, but if you're, not sure about how much water you consume, one of the things that I did is, I bought a water bottle. I knew that if I filled it up, it was 32 ounces. So therefore, if I had four of those every single day, added up to a gallon of water, right? So, if it's a half a gallon of water, if it's three-quarters of a gallon of water, if it's more than a gallon, whatever it is, that works for you, again, do your own research. But that was one of the pivotal things that would always allow me to like have a good week of weight loss is when I was consistent in drinking that water. So again, commit to small changes at first, get the win. So you don't have to lose all of your weight in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. My journey, it took me a year, to lose 83 pounds. It took my dad a year to lose 100 pounds. But what was really interesting is that I did lose quite a bit. So you lose more in the beginning that you do on the tail end of it. But ultimately, what was really good was that I got myself into a routine. I was able to be disciplined, and I just wanted to make sure that it was something that was simple that I could do every day and make sure that was the most important thing because I know myself. If it's too complicated, if it's too hard, if it's too much, then at some point I'm just going to quit and not do it because it's so easy to do that. So, just to sum it all up, again, in this episode we focused on obesity, how many people statistically are obese in this country over the age of 20, which is 40%. We talked about some of those diseases, right? Cardiovascular. We talked about the type 2 diabetes, right? Sleep apnea, joint, mental health. And we talked about like just doing something simple to address obesity. And it doesn't have to be done all at once. It isn't one thing. It's just a combination of a lot of little things. So thank you for tuning in today for our third episode talking about health. And if you know someone who needs to hear this and watch this, share it with them. I always encourage you to subscribe. I'd love to have some conversation. So if you have time, leave a comment so we can interact, and also rate the show. You can find us on Hey Charles Biz on YouTube, Hey Charles 77 on Instagram and TikTok, Hey Charles on Apple Podcast and Spotify, and Charles Ernst on LinkedIn. See you next time.